Welcome to Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the podcast where I interview the most inspirational and driven leaders of today and unearth their stories of diversity and inclusion to help educate, motivate, and inspire future leaders to make the world a better place. My name is Leila McKenzie, and today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by the award-winning author and top 100 leadership speaker, Karin Hurt. Karin inspires transformational change through robust leadership development programs and also has over 2 decades worth of experience in customer service, sales, and human resources. She's the award-winning author of 2 different books, Winning Well, A Manager's Guide to Getting Better Results Without Losing Your Soul and Overcoming an Imperfect Boss, and also a recent book which she's actually launched for future leaders and our youth as well, which I can't wait to hear about later on in the show today. A former Verizon wireless executive, Karin transformed customer service outsourcing to reach parity in quality with internal centers and developed a leading sales team that won the President's Award for Customer Growth. Her keynotes inspire leaders with a proven and practical leadership technique and techniques developed over her rich career as an executive, speaker, and strategic advisor. Karin has a BA in Communications from Wake Forest University, an MA from Townsend University in Organizational Communication, and additional graduate work at the University of Maryland, where she teaches in the MBA and Executive Education program. Welcome to the show today, Karin.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
You are so welcome. And I feel exhausted having gone through all of those different accolades already as quickly as I could and talking about all the wonderful things that you've been doing. So thank you for being with us today. And for all of our listeners who haven't heard of you yet over here in the UK, do give us a little brief synopsis of everything you've been up to recently and some of the key projects that you've been managing of late.
Yeah, so a number of things. So we have been traveling internationally with our Winning Well message, which is all about how do you get really great breakthrough results and stay a decent human being along the way. And so we have been doing keynote speaking and doing a lot of long-term leadership development programs. We were actually in England this past year doing some work in Bristol. And we're headed to Ireland in May to speak at the Project Management Institute Global Conference there.
I think it's fabulous that you work with your partner as well. I think it's really brilliant that you kind of both dovetail in these brilliant keynote speeches that you do together.
Yeah, there's an interesting story there, actually. So David and I were both blogging in the leadership space while we were both still in our executive day jobs. And we met at a book publishing lab because we had both published our self-published book, but we were really ready to do one with a traditional publisher. So we went to New York City to learn all about how to do that. And we realized as we were talking to one another that we were pretty much writing the same book. But we had only followed each other online. So we had been reading each other's blogs, but we never really had a whole conversation. And so we talked about it. I said, well, maybe we should collaborate on something. And he said, well, like what? A white paper? And I thought about it. I thought, no, we should write this book together. So he was living in Colorado. I was living in Maryland. We both, we wrote the book all, halfway across the country from one another. And then after the whole book was published, realized we had fallen in love along the way. So we got married, merged our businesses together, and now it's just fantastic because we travel, we speak, and we're both doing something we're very passionate about, and we get to do it together. So it's a lot of fun.
How lovely! So 2 kindred spirits in the world of executive performance and business. That's brilliant.
I really believe that the internet has made people so accessible. And, not only David, but I have met an amazing, we've connected online. It's just amazing to me the number of really genuine friends that I've made by listening to what they're doing, by reading what they're doing, supporting one another, and one thing leads to another. There's opportunities for collaboration. There's opportunities to share work or refer work. So it's great. It's a great time to be doing this kind of work with that level of connectivity.
Absolutely. And it makes you realize that the world actually is really quite a small place, isn't it?
Yes,
So
yes,
accessible. I think it's fantastic. We must embrace technology.
yes.
Tell me a little bit about how you came to be where you are today, because obviously you're very, very successful. You and your partner David in all the work that you're doing. How did you actually end up being where you are right now and doing these fabulous keynote speeches and speaking to some of the organizations that you help along their journey to finding purpose and finding their soul that you mentioned before?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I had worked at Verizon for 20 years, and first decade was human resources, leadership development, that kind of stuff. Second decade was all field assignments. So I led a 2,200 person sales team, a 10,000 person contact center organization, and all of that was fantastic. But the last couple of years that I was there, I was involved in transforming the call centers that were taking Verizon calls that were not Verizon employees, so outsourced call centers. And I was doing that, I was finding myself going into these other companies and looking at their performance, which was a big challenge. When I first took over this role, there was a really low performance in a number of these centers. And I said, what is going on here? Why is the performance so low? And I felt like there was either in some of the centers a real big focus on results, but no focus on connection and relationships and culture. Or there was such a focus on culture and relationships with no focus on results.
Hmm.
And so I found myself telling the same stories again and again as I was going in and working with these frontline leaders and even their senior leaders about the need for the focusing on results and relationships.
Hmm.
And I also found that I was trying to simplify a lot of the things that I really believed about leadership into very simple tools because these folks did not have a lot of time and they needed some support in leading well. And I started writing all this down on a blog. I had no intention of ever leaving Verizon. And it was interesting to me because clearly the messaging was important. I was mostly sending it just so those folks would read it. But it really started getting an international following. And people started calling me and saying, "Hey, will you come keynote speak? When's your book coming out? What would you do training for?" No, I'm a Verizon executive. I can't go do all of that. And as I started to think about it, I thought, what if I could? This this would be fun. And it works because I know that because we got those results just got better and better and better with using these techniques. So I gave Verizon 4 months notice and I said, and everybody thought I was crazy. Like, nobody leaves this kind of a good job. Why are you doing this? You're never going to make your salary. And it was risky. It was risky. And the first year was hard. But so I've been out now for 5 years. And it has been just an incredible journey. We really do get an opportunity to work with some incredible leaders. It's been really fun to work at the senior levels of companies and get to support at an executive level all the way to the front line and working with supervisors. And what we're learning along the way has been fantastic. We've done work and we spent a month last year in Southeast Asia, which was fantastic. And really do get to do a lot of broad variety of work. So I haven't looked back, and it's been good. We're working on our next book right now, which is called Courageous Cultures.
Wonderful.
Courageous Cultures said building teams of micro innovators, problem solvers, and customer advocates. At least that's the working title. We're in the proposal and conversation stage now with our publisher. So, something may change there. But we're really partnering with the University of North Colorado. Mm-hmm. So we are having all this really in-depth quantifiable research that will really support the theories that we have. And we're beginning to get all that data in right now. And so more to come on that.
Oh, how fascinating. And I think there's so much to be said for courageous cultures and really trying to push the boundaries, because clearly you're living proof that you can feel that fear and actually take the plunge, and things can work out very, very well, almost serendipity, or almost serendipity rather, how things have now worked out, I guess. Um,
Yeah.
I guess I'm keen to hear a little bit more. Now you've given me that little teaser of the research and the work that you're doing around this courageous culture, in leadership with the new book. Are there any specific patterns that you've kind of highlighted, or you've noticed patterns emerging almost from the analysis of that data?
Yeah. So one of the things that we are finding, it's very interesting. If you go into a senior level of an organization, you say, do you want your teams at the front line solving problems on their own? Do you want them to be advocating for the customer? Do you want them to be raising issues and concerns? 100% of the time. Absolutely, I want their ideas. Yes. And in fact, I'm frustrated that they don't speak up. I don't know why they don't speak up. Then you go to the front line and you hear, no one ever listens to me. They don't want to hear my ideas. I spoke up once and I got in trouble. I'm like, how long ago was that? Well, 10 years ago, right? So there's all this baggage of people being very afraid to speak up, which we're calling FOSU, fear of speaking up. And when we ask why, it's people have had a bad experience in the past. And often that experience is a long time ago, but it has left a fearful memory, and they have put that away and they say, well, it won't work. It didn't work then, it won't work now. Or they feel like when they've spoken up, nobody ever did anything with it. Or it's that they don't know how. So they are bringing ideas forth, but they're not doing it in a way that is really positioning their ideas in a way that an executive can really hear it and feel like it's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there is a real need both to create psychological safety and make people feel safe, genuinely safe, and to help leaders ask well and really not just say I have an open door, but to say, hey, give me one specific idea you think that could improve the customer experience. And then really, really listen to what people are saying. And then on the flip side, there's an opportunity to really train frontline employees on how do you speak up well in a way that can be heard. And so that's a lot of what the research is about. And then how do you find what we're calling micro innovations, not big innovations that are going to totally transform your company, but how do you pay attention to and encourage the little incremental things that if everybody were doing and focusing on making things just that much better, but you have everybody in your organization doing that, and can you imagine the increase in the customer experience, productivity, and revenue?
You're completely right. If everyone had that one little initiative or that one little extra purpose onto their day, you're right, the impact could be absolutely phenomenal. And you know what? That really resonates with me, what you said about that, almost that kind of disconnect, because I've noticed that as well with a lot of leaders and a lot of corporates that I speak to. There is kind of that significant almost disparity from the shop floor, so to speak, and the C-suite kind of level leadership, whereby maybe the leaders think that well, why wouldn't people speak up? That's just a natural thing to do, but actually it's coaxing them out of their shells. Employees at all different levels, so that everyone can have their voice heard, and so that the leaders of those organizations, CEOs, CPOs, whoever it might be at that kind of C-suite, so that they are encouraged to really take stock and to listen, and then to behave in such a way whereby actually they're putting positive steps in place to demonstrate that they have taken everyone's thoughts into consideration.
Yes, exactly.
For those of our listeners who are tuning into the podcast today, whether they be aspiring leaders, whether they be future leaders, what kind of advice might you be able to share with them to go back to their organizations and to try and implement some positive change? Or if they are a leader leading an organization, what they can do to encourage people to speak up?
Yeah, so one technique we call own the ugly. And this is
Wow.
a very, very simple series of 4 questions. I've never worked with a team where we asked these questions and had people engage in it, where we did not come up with something really important to change. So it's U is what are we underestimating? G is what's got to go. So what do we need to stop doing? L, where are we losing? Thinking about competitive pressures and that kind of thing. And Y, which is my favorite, where are we missing the yes? Where is there an opportunity, a transformative opportunity for us in our business? And we find that if we work with senior leaders and we ask that question, some of the real transformative change that really needs to happen will emerge. Or if you work with a frontline team leader and their direct reports, and you ask those questions, they're coming up with these little micro innovations that would make things dramatically better. We were working with one startup, and they had grown from 5 people to 150 people
Wow.
in a couple of years. And they were doing incredibly well. So they asked us to come facilitate their offsite meeting, their end of year meeting. And we did this exercise. And it was interesting because with the What's Gotta Go group, there was, they listed all of the communication software and project management software. They came up with a list of about 37 required tools that people were using on a regular basis. And they said, some of these have got to go because we're spending more time updating the projects than we are working on the work. And so they gave everybody a couple of dots and they said, put the dots next to the 3 that you think we really should keep. Fascinating. Almost all the dots clustered around the same specific ones. They said, what if we got rid of all the rest of this? And the COO was sitting in the back of the room, and I thought, he's going to go crazy. And he didn't. He said, I thought you guys like this stuff. Do you know how expensive it is to keep all of this running? Let's get rid of it.
Really?
And so within a 1-hour period, they made this massive change that really streamlined the work and reduced expense, just by asking those 4 strategic questions.
God, that's incredible. That is absolutely incredible. And it's just that lack of communication, isn't it? I mean, there must be so many hundreds of businesses out there that are not asking these kinds of questions, and it's probably costing them hundreds of thousands of pounds and dollars, just presuming that everyone is aligned when perhaps they're not.
Yeah, another example was, so we were working with a contact center that took calls from Microsoft. So they were an outsourced call center, but taking calls from Microsoft. And what they were finding is that, they were vulnerable because they were, if Microsoft shut down their contract, they would go out of business. So they really needed to diversify. So where were they missing the yes was they went and surveyed all of the people who were already working there and found out what additional certifications they had. And then they were able to identify what would be other potential clients that they could go out and, without adding any headcount, service because of the certifications that they had never asked. So just so simple. And that was just a supervisor who said, you know what I noticed when I'm interviewing people as they're coming in, they have way more than just a Microsoft certification. They have these other certifications. What if we did this inventory?
Oh my goodness.
And part of it is just taking the time to go slow enough to, just to take the time out to carve out, to have those conversations, because people have ideas.
Absolutely. And I think that leaders do often negate to take that time out because we live in such a busy world. There's information overflow everywhere. If you're anything like me, my email is constantly overflowing. I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I've got to do this, tick all these things off the box. And, it's really easy just to neglect actually having that time to sit back and reflect and think about what is coming next and how to, properly solve these problems opposed to just piling more stuff on top.
Yes.
What are the key motivations, I guess, for you? Because obviously you're speaking with and trying to advise many leaders who are out there in the corporate worlds and the startup worlds. How do you find your motivation? Because to me, you seem to have such a lot of, an abundance of energy almost. What are the key facets that really motivate you? What are your yeses?
I really believe, I say I'm on a mission to rid the world of bad leadership. because there
Big
are
mission.
still so many leaders who are leaders, and I use that term loosely. There are so many people in leadership positions who are leading from a place of fear and intimidation, and it really doesn't have to be that way. And I know from experience, and David knows from experience, that you can get results and be a decent human being. In fact, you can. That's the real key to getting results that will last and sustain. And so, when I dig in, a lot of times it's people haven't had the training that they need to do that well. They've had a bad manager or two, and they've followed their lead, and it is amazing to me how many companies have not really implemented just basic leadership training. So that is, that's what drives me, because it breaks my heart to see, people coming to work, getting stressed out and not getting the results and burning out. And if they just knew how to have a difficult conversation, how to hold someone accountable, and also maintain the relationship, that it doesn't have to be ignore the problem so you maintain the relationship. You do both, and that I think is that for me, that's really the driving factor. And now this concept of courage. In our work, we are running into a lot of people who are very afraid, and they're not afraid for the right reasons. Because because I'm also working at the senior level, and I know they shouldn't have things to be afraid of, and so something is lost in translation. And so I feel like we want to smooth that out so that the conversations can be happening up, down, and sideways, and everyone is collaborating to make the business better and to have more influential relationships with one another.
Absolutely. And I think it really does actually strengthen those relationships. I mean, I've spoken to many leaders who also have the fear that you talk about, and the worry and the concern about broaching these difficult subjects with their bosses, with their managers. But actually, once they've done it and got it out there in the open, those
Right.
relationships really start to flourish, and both
Yeah.
sides have a far better understanding of one another and what it is that makes them tick, to the point that
Yes.
actually they can really build on and learn a huge amount more about themselves, and ultimately inspires a lot of confidence, I think.
Yes.
And on the subject of kind of courageous leadership and this collaborative approach that you talk about, what does diversity and inclusion mean to you? And obviously, that's a big focus point for the new book. I'm really keen to hear your take.
Yeah, so I really believe it starts with being comfortable who you are as a leader, and and to be grounded in your own authenticity. And that was something that took me a minute to learn. When I was younger, I thought, oh, I need to be, have this executive presence and show up this way. And what I found, and a lot of the research that I'm finding now is people you have a lot more trust when you show up real, and when you can be a bit vulnerable and you can admit your mistakes and admit you don't know it all. That's where the real trust happens. And so part of when I think about diversity, I really think about, are we giving people the space and the trust and the benefit of the doubt to show who they really are, or are we asking people to fit into a mold? And are we genuinely interested in getting to know one another as people? And I think there is a lot of opportunity, and there's a lot of tension in the world right now, not just in the organizations, but politically. And that's why we wrote our children's book. It was interesting. So our children's book is called Glowstone Peak, and it's all about diversity, inclusion, and hope. And we wrote it with my 13-year-old son too, Sebastian.
Oh, how
And
lovely.
we were hiking one day, and we were talking. We had a couple of conversations that were pretty disturbing, of people that we knew and friends that we had who were on various different sides of political debates. And it had gotten pretty, we were watching people who we loved being very nasty to one another. And we said, how do we create more dialogue of people really seeking to understand where people are coming from? How do we encourage people to actively listen? And Sebastian said, well, what if we started with kids? And because if we read a children's book, then the parents would have to read the children's book to their kids, and then they would be having this conversation with their children, and maybe they would realize that they have something to learn. Mm-hmm. But it's a fantasy. It's all done with fairies and trolls and all of that, but it all, they're on a mission, and they realize that they need to collaborate and learn from one another and embrace each other's differences and strengths in order to make an impact. So that's I believe that for the workplace too.
Oh, how wonderful! And you talk of fairies and trolls, and I'm sure other mythical creatures. Given the political state of the UK
and
America, I'll not mention the B word. Oh my goodness, it is a bit depressing watching the news over here sometimes. But no, it's very relatable, fairies and trolls, with what's going on in what's going on in the British and American, I dare say, politics and economy at the moment. Actually breaking things down in a simplistic way. It's probably quite right, frankly. And what better people to learn from than our children, who have not been affected by all of the various different outside influences and back chat and the news and everything like this. I think it's probably, it's quite a refreshing way to look at things, from quite a, almost naive viewpoint of the children, and really kind of starting with them, because if we're not inspiring the future generations, then really what are we doing?
Right.
And I guess that leads me on to another couple of questions that I have, which are, what are the big influences in your life? Because clearly Sebastian at 13 has been a big influence for this book, which I think is just, really quite heartwarming, really, very, very touching. And obviously your lovely other half, who's also been a big impact. Have there been any particular inspirations in your life to date, or leaders that you've thought, oh my goodness, do you know what, that's really resonated with me in my career right now?
Well, from the very beginning, as I was breaking out as a blogger and an entrepreneur, I really paid a lot of attention to Seth Godin. And he has just written some incredible books, and he has a podcast and a blog. I don't get out of bed without reading his blog in the morning. It's short. It's always short. And it's always inspiration. And I always say, how did he know that that's exactly what I needed to hear right then? And so for people who are looking to do something really different, to go out into his big message is ship your art, right? Don't be afraid. And so when I first was blogging, I can't believe I did this, I don't recommend this, by the way, but I wrote my very first blog post on a Sunday, and then I sent it to him. I mean, he's very famous. And I just wrote my first blog post. And he wrote back within an hour. And he said, good for you for shipping your art. And I thought, he did not have to do that. That was just so kind. And then through the years since then, I've gotten to know him a bit more. I was able to attend a workshop of his, and he wrote an endorsement for our book, that we were able to put on the back cover. And he's just been incredibly supportive. But I believe in his message. I believe he lives his message. So he's a real role model for me.
I love Seth Godin. I absolutely love him. I can't believe you picked him as one of your inspirations. I think it's fantastic. I have a number of his books, including one of my favorites, Poke the Box. The bright yellow book that he wrote is just fantastic. And that is all about shipping, and actually just getting things out there, and just doing it, frankly. That I think that's the brilliant thing about him. He's kind of, he doesn't mince his words really at all, does he? He's very, he's simplistic in his approach, and he's quite like, you think, oh God, of course. He just tells you the stuff that you need to hear, doesn't he?
Yes, yes.
For you, if you were going to I guess, be speaking to your former self, or when you're giving advice to your 13-year-old son, what are the kind of messages or pearls of wisdom that you might have shared?
This one took me too long to learn, which is your peers are the most important relationships that you have in business. And you may think it's your boss trying to please your boss, you may think it's your direct reports. All of those relationships are really important. And when I was younger, I was really good at leading my team and I was really good at managing up, but I was so competitive that I thought of my peers as competition, and in a stack rank world where they were always going to stack rank who had the best sales results. And that was such a mistake. And I wish I had built those collaborative relationships that I learned were so vital earlier in my career, and spend less time thinking of the competition as them instead of the competition being mediocrity. And so that is my very best advice. And I still see it. I think it's human nature for high performers to feel competitive. It's not worth it. And at some point you're going to know that. You might as well learn it sooner than later, would be my advice.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And I guess in summary, and do add on if there's anything at all that I'm missing, but I've certainly learned a lot from our podcast today. Least of all, kind of being able to balance the performance with the relationship piece and making sure that we can kind of keep those two as good friends and in balance. And also a lot about the micro innovations and making sure that we try, if we aren't already, speaking up to our bosses and our leaders, and for leaders to really be able to listen, two ears and one mouth, and make sure that we are actually listening as much as we can to what people are saying. To be courageous, that's another thing that I've learned from today. I loved your quote about owning the ugly. I think that's fantastic. I've never heard that before. I think that's brilliant. What are the pieces? Which are the pieces that we are missing? That we need to kind of, we need to stop and think. Where is the yes, and what is the purpose, I guess. And finally, I love that piece that you mentioned there about your peers being the most important relationships that you have, and actually that competition doesn't necessarily exist. And so actually, competing against yourself, I guess, is maybe a piece that we could look at. But actually, worrying about and competing with others all the time is not necessarily always the best way to be. So hopefully that summarizes in a nutshell from today.
Well, that is a great summary.
I hope I got everything in there. I'm manically scribbling down here.
You were very good. I would say you were a very good listener.
Thank you very much, Karin. And for all of our listeners who are tuning in today, could you just let us know the best way that we can get in touch with you? Obviously, I'd really like to encourage everyone to reach out to Karin and her partner on LinkedIn if you're looking for help or advice, or you would like to really mix things up in a positive way within your organization. So do get in touch on LinkedIn. I'll also put everything into the show notes as well, which will be available on my website. And you can also get in touch with Karin directly as well. Is there a website that we can go to?
Yes. Our website is called Let's Grow Leaders, and we have a blog. We publish a couple times a week. So if you'd like to subscribe to our blog, that I would love to have you do that and stay in touch that way.
Perfect. And I'll put all of those notes as well down into the show notes, which will be available very, very soon. And we can keep an eye out as well for the new book, because it sounds like it's going to be published very soon. And I can't wait to have a read of that.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me. It was just a real delight to talk with you.
Oh, bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.